Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this evening. I will make these slides, the pictures disappear so you can see my slides, but it just means I won't be able to see you. So if for any reason you lose me or the connection goes or whatever it might be, please shout and let me know, because I won't be able to see anyone as soon as I hit this button, which I will do now. So what I wanted to do this evening was really just to tell you a story. It's a story about my experience of being a learner, but perhaps more importantly about the research that I've done with children on learning. And I just wanted to kind of share with you where I'm at with that. It's a journey that I've been on for a number of years, and we've kind of reached a moment, a point where a lot of this thinking is coming together. And so I wanted to be able to share that with you this evening and to get your thoughts and feedback. So I'm going to share a few slides and share a few thoughts, which will take me about 35 minutes, and then there'll be lots of time to chat it through with you after, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts and ideas. As I said, this presentation is really about my relationship with learning, and it's been an interesting one. Indeed, every time I share on an academic platform, I question whether I should be here at all. When I was younger, I was not a good learner. I tried hard, but I never felt as though I reached those expected targets. I had a childhood that was full of advantages, and somehow that got me to university. But throughout, I merely felt I was a passenger on a journey with a prepaid ticket to an approved destination. At university, oh, hold on, sorry, hopefully you can see another slide. That's me at university. I spent my time engaged in community projects, seeing my academic learning as a chore that had to be completed. As a result, I was the one person who you didn't want to sit next to in the library, as I constantly searched for creative ways to make the time go quicker. I think the assault course that I created in the library at my university still has an air of legend about it. If someone had asked me at that time if I was a learner, I would have said no. Being a learner was something I did occasionally. It certainly was not something I was. I then left university and found myself in my first job, and literally within weeks, I realized something major was missing from my life. I needed to learn. As part of both a personal journey, but also in the context of the research and practice-based opportunities that I've had with children over the last 20 years. I've been starting conversations about what it means to be a learner. Indeed, increasingly, I feel passionately that a positive learning identity is vital to our ability to navigate a changing world. Today, I wanted to invite you to be part of that conversation, as I share a vision built on thinking from childhood studies for what I'm calling the connected learner, a learner who is plugged in, switched on, ready to learn. We don't need to look far to see the signs of change. Stuart Russell, Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley, just speaking in relation to rapid advances in technology, said that this transition or fourth industrial age will cause the most profound moment in human history. Add to this social crises, health emergencies, and a climate disaster, and we get a sense of the challenges that we're facing. The UN Secretary General has been vociferous in highlighting that threat. He says, our world as we know it and the future we want, are at risk. Oh, you can't see that. Hold on, sorry. Let me just, there, hopefully you can see that now. Okay, great. It invites a response. If we could do one thing to change the world, what would it be? It's a question that I asked my children, which helpfully cover a spectrum of ages. I've numbered their responses just so that you can see them, but I'm going to try and play them talking. I hope this will come across on your computers. That was everyone being kind and to help one another, which wasn't prompted, having asked that question, I realized that their response and my desire to equip them to be able to make that difference was really what this talk was all about. Nancy Klein, in a really interesting book, The Promise That Changes Everything, asks a very similar question. I was thinking about what more I could do with the rest of my life to make a difference in the world. Out of nowhere came this question. What is the one thing which, if it were to change, could change everything else for the better? And an answer, the quality of people's independent thinking. Indeed, the UN, as part of their response to the changing world, have identified 17 sustainable development goals. Goal number 4 is ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Indeed, the idea of inspiring and enabling a lifelong learner seems to be a fundamental basis to respond to all the other goals successfully. From governments to business, people are recognizing the value attached to a broader, more socially focused understanding of what it means to be a learner. In their analysis of a changing landscape for learning, Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan, in a really timely work called The New Long Life, suggest that if we're to maximize social ingenuity and as a result respond to these global changes effectively, we need to be able to narrate a life story that brings meaning, explore learning and transforming in ways to make successful transitions, and relate, connecting deeply and building and sustaining meaningful relationships. It offers a vision for learning that is not solely marked by the ability to recall prescribed content, but is more defined by a notion of the independent thinker, one who meaningfully and deeply connects to their learning journey as an extension of who they are and who they wish to be. So we have a challenge, a world in flux, and we have a solution, a lifelong learner who is socially connected. But there's a problem. This is Jack. I first met Jack in the head teacher's office. He'd been sent there for being disruptive. This was not his first visit. Jack was making this solo trip between the classroom and the office on an almost daily basis. He was matter of fact in his interview with the head teacher, resigned to whatever he was told to do next. It was clear that although Jack was physically present, he was emotionally absent. At school, Jack had decided to play this part, which could be displayed best by rejecting the expectations set by adults and actively sabotaging his own learning. In short, Jack was not plugged in or switched on or ready to learn. In fact, he had created an identity for himself, defined by disconnection. Jack was a non-learner. And Jack's not alone. Indeed, the facts and figures point to growing disconnections amongst learners, young and old. In the UK, the 2022 Good Childhood Report, which I'm sure many of you will know from the Children's Society, highlighted that school was the area of children's lives that they feel most unhappy about. Indeed, this was worse now than 10 years ago, particularly as a result of high levels of pressure they faced and a fear of failure. And it's not just a UK problem. UNICEF report card from Canada, where I do a lot of work, also highlights similar challenges. In this extract from a 2020 report, Worlds Apart, says, while Canada's schools tend to offer high-performing learning environments, they are also high-pressure environments and seem to be less successful in fostering children's sense of belonging and well-being. Indeed, as I started to share Jack's story with others, so I learned that too many of us are disconnected from learning. We're not plugged in or switched on. And even if we are connected, that is often experienced within the context of defined activities in defined spaces for defined periods of time. For many adults I spoke with, their sense of identity as a learner appeared to be partial or fleeting. It is something we were for a time rather than we are. Amongst children, being a learner is too often aspirational. It is a goal to be aimed at, precipitating a flood of anxieties over whether those defined targets of success will ever be met. As I spent more time with Jack, it became clear that this sense of disconnection came from him having no value, no voice, and no vision in himself as a learner. At the age of 11, he had already decided that he did not want to be a learner, which is, to say the least, problematic within the context of a vision that is seeking to promote lifelong learning as a response to a changing world. So what's going on? I've been engaged with childhood studies for some time before meeting Jack. What it had shown me was that in societies that had always stressed the importance of adults know best, we created a world of partial knowledge, where our understanding and practices towards children were based on assumptions rather than reality. What childhood studies offers is a paradigm shift, a way of turning socially accepted thinking about children upside down. As part of this, there are some defining tenets. The first, the importance of recognizing the context of children's lives. Childhood is understood as socially constructed. This invites attention on the variety of social contexts within which children live their lives, the idea of childhoods, as well as an awareness of those dominant discourses or attitudes that shape the constructed ideal of what childhood should be like. Secondly, the competence of the child. Children are and must be seen as active in the construction and determination of their own social lives, the lives of those around them, and the societies in which they live. Children thus emerge as active meaning makers rather than as objects shaped by the social forces they have no control over. In short, it offered a format to assess the landscape in which children come to interact with adults, through giving us a lens to think about, firstly, what those discourses around children are in society, the noise about the child. Secondly, how that noise filters through to the different spaces we share with children, certain noise becoming more prominent than others. Third, how those discourses inform our understandings as adults and the assumptions that we hold, shaping an image of the child. Fourth, how those assumptions are connected to our practices with children. And finally, how that informs children's experiences. Despite childhood studies developing an applied track record in relation to areas such as the law, in other areas its application has been underwhelming. The question was whether we could use this approach to offer insight into the challenges that Jack and others had in connecting as learners. Meet the disconnected learner. The disconnected learner, or the standardized learner, has its roots in the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s and the birth of compulsory schooling. The disconnected learner can be characterized by discourses around the child that reflect a sense of the child as ominous, a threat that needs to be controlled, becoming, their value is in what they'll be in the future, and malleable, children are passive, ready to be molded by adult-centric instruction. This thinking, which I've said is linked to compulsory schooling, reduces the child to a source material to be prepared for social productivity. And it seems to have changed very little in the last 150 years. Barry Mail, who was influential in the emerging field of childhood studies, in a review of school that highlights these dominant discourses, says that school is defined by a commitment to adult-centric practices focused on shaping the child as future beings. The school only works through a reliance on the demonstration of adult authority, that within this, adults see children as a project to be worked on, that as a result of their experiences within school, children see themselves as an object. It's a damning indictment. Indeed, in his reflection on the disconnected learner, psychologist and writer Alfie Kohn highlights two defining practices in schools: that shapes so much of what goes on, particularly that sense of identity that the learner holds. First, performance and that desire to reach targets, and secondly, obedience, following the rules. First, performance. In a deep dive into education, David Goodhart, in his book Head, Hand, Heart, highlights the hierarchy that emerges around a system that has prioritized cognitive ability above all else, both within the classroom and beyond. He says how we laud the brightest, but other qualities such as character, integrity, experience, common sense, courage, and a willingness to toil command less respect. In short, Goodhart summarizes this by saying, in recent decades, in the interest of efficiency, fairness, and progress, Western democracies have established systems of competition in which the most able succeed and too many of the rest feel like failures. That sense of failure is very real for learners like Jack, with implications for the way in which they think about their learning identity. In this example, taken from research into the standard assessment tests in England, not to be confused with the scholastic aptitude tests in the US, though I think the outcomes are pretty similar. Children aged 10 and 11 years old talked about these exams as a means to mark out who was, in their words, brainy and who was dumb, which they realized would be reflected in the streams they were assigned to at secondary school. Asked about taking the test, one child said, "Yeah, you won't get a job or something. You won't get a very good job, will you, if you don't take them?" At 11 years old, these tests were marking both their current and future identities as a learner. As one child very poignantly summed up in a separate piece of research, so I'm frightened I'll do the SATs and I'll be a nothing. Secondly, obedience. In his assessment of the American school system, John Taylor Gatto reflects on the way in which school practices mark a drive for compliance, control, and order. Indeed, he says, the truth is that our schools don't really teach anything except how to obey the rules. It is telling that the global initiative to end all corporal punishment for children highlights that for 1 in 2 of all 6 to 17-year-olds, corporal punishment is still a legal part of their education. The other half might escape being hit, but an increase in punitive disciplinary approaches over the last decade still makes obedience a defining feature of their school experience. The result is, being a learner is defined by how obedient you are seen as being and how obedient you see yourself as, even if that means accepting authoritarian practices. Talking with a group of learners, they told me how they had done a piece of work for their teacher, which they then found in the bin. I asked them how that made them feel. Annoyed, upset, they replied. They told me they had spent time on it, noting that he would shout at you if you didn't bring it in. So I asked their response to finding it ripped up, and they said, "You have to accept it, because if we shout at them, they will probably suspend us." What emerges is that as a response to dominant discourses or noise that reflect a child's passivity, we create this image of the child as a disconnected or standardized learner, creating practices that center on performance and obedience, impacting children's experiences such that learning identities are conditional, based on achieving adult targets and following the rules, with implications for the strength and resilience of their learning connections. As Ken Robinson, the internationally renowned educationist, said, if you run an education system based on standardization and conformity that suppresses individuality, imagination, and creativity, don't be surprised if that's what it does. But what if we could break the cycle? What if it was possible to disrupt this pattern, to rely more on ways of thinking about the child that recognize their capacity as active meaning makers? let's meet the connected learner. In contrast to the disconnected learner, the connected learner is far from passive, but as represented by these double-headed arrow arms, is actively involved in making meaning as a response to the social world they're part of. Straight away, this starts to have fundamental implications for learning. It moves it from the idea of the child needing to be taught to become, as with the disconnected or standardized learner, to a model where the aim is that the child learns to be, as they play an active part in their learning community. This offers such an exciting shift then in how we think about learning itself. In a definition that I always rely on, Chris Watkins and a team of researchers defined learning as creating knowledge by making sense of our experiences. It's really powerful as it immediately centers learning around the active role of the child, and perhaps just as importantly, makes us reflect on the role of the adult. However, to be able to create knowledge by making sense of our experiences, we need to be plugged in and switched on. We need to be connected. When we were reflecting on Jack's disconnection earlier, we spoke about him lacking value, voice, and vision. So let's revisit these and see if we can represent them as alternative discourses for thinking about the child as a learner. Firstly, value. I started to meet regularly with Jack and another group of children who were finding it hard in the classroom. In that first meeting with the group, I asked them to draw a picture of themselves and inside it to write down words that best summed up the skills they brought to a learning task. Outside this, I asked them to write down the skills they wanted to develop. As they busied away, I noticed that although words were appearing, they were only appearing outside of their self-portraits. We came back together. So what skills do you have? I asked. The group was silent. Not one child had identified a single skill that they thought they brought to their learning. Ken Robinson, who I noted earlier, reflects on having that sense of value in relation to what he terms finding your element. He says that finding your element is vital to understanding who you are and what you're capable of being and doing with your life. Notably, that sense of value that comes from finding our element is not restricted to certain people. It is there in all of us. It just might take a little more time and effort to uncover with some than with others. It is a dynamic and purposeful notion of ability and inner strength, competence and potential, which can be linked to thinkers like John Dewey, that in many ways sum up Carol Dweck's well-known thinking on mindset. What Dweck encourages us to recognize is the extent to which the view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you live your life. If we can have a growth mindset, a value in ourselves as learners, it allows us to increasingly see beyond what we might have originally labeled impossible and recategorize it as possible. For the individual, that sense of value allows us to move beyond definitions of failure and to enable the learner to be more open to their learning vulnerabilities, embracing these as part of their journey. Learning, therefore, is not about what I can do, but about what I can't do yet. This focus on value can be seen in approaches to education like the democratic school movement, as well as in education models in countries such as Finland. Indeed, I can still remember the first time I went into one particular school. It felt different as soon as I walked in. It wasn't the welcome in reception or the fish tank in the corridor. It was the children. They walked around with a sense of confidence and purpose that I associate with those fabled offices of a Californian tech enterprise. The children had a sense of value in themselves as learners, and it was this view of themselves that they were taking forward into each learning experience. Secondly, voice. Inspired by a group of students, I wrote a book a few years ago called Giving Children a Voice, promoting the notion of a culture of advocacy. The book emerged out of this class in which students were looking at how starting conversations could change practices in different settings that adults and children share. In short, the book became about inviting adults in these different spaces to actively establish the voice of the child, and secondly, amplify the voice of the child as a means for advancing effective child-centered practice. It reflected thinking that was deeply embedded in the journey of childhood studies, and the extent to which enabling the voice of the child could challenge those misplaced understandings that too often inform children's lives. A wonderful example of this in practice is reflected from a piece of research conducted in South Africa. The research team gave children a microphone and asked them to conduct conversations on issues that matter to them. What the microphone did was disrupt traditional adult-child power relations, and it demanded that adults needed to engage with children in a different way. As one head teacher said in relation to the project, "What I have learned is that we look at kids as not being aware of the issues. But after hearing the programs, the children's recordings, I've realized that children know about things we think they don't know about. I realized that they know, and if given the chance to speak about those things, they speak. I realized that they think deeply about these issues that they raise. I no longer look at children as mere children who do not know anything. I look at them as people who know something and who have something to say to me." Prioritizing children's voices in schools offers a foundation to engage more deeply with emotions and the relationship between learning and well-being, through to defining a shared language for learning and establishing meaningful opportunities. Giving children a voice boosts positive learning identities and informs more effective policy and practice. And as this quote suggests, it can be transformational. Thirdly, vision. In his first speech after leaving the White House, Barack Obama talked about his vision for supporting young people as future leaders. He talked about the need to create pathways for them to take leadership, for them to get involved. It offers some really interesting questions about the how of participation. Childhood Studies has seen some amazing research around enabling children's participation in so many different areas of their everyday lives. What this research undeniably illustrates is that children can be a force in contributing to a shared vision for their communities. However, a question remains about the extent to which all children are aware of what it means to get involved, what it means to have a vision, and how that vision can be brought to life. In the context of learning, lots of work has been done on making learning visible. John Hattie's work, Visible Learning, highlights this through bringing to life the metacognitive process, or the instructions we give ourselves on how to do a particular task. Research on managing change from the corporate world has also highlighted the extent to which having some architecture to support the thinking process, to make it visible, is valuable. And it was this and that desire to enable Jack to recognize how he could take control of his learning that I took into my ongoing encounters with him. After a few weeks, I found out that there was something that Jack valued in himself. He was good at riding his BMX bike. I wanted Jack to realize that in riding his bike, there was lots of learning going on, creating knowledge by making sense of his experiences, which as a result made Jack as a learner. So I asked him if he could teach me to do a trick. After a bit of negotiation, we arranged for his bike to come into school, and we found a time when the playground was clear. In preparation, Jack and I had started talking about the steps that Jack might need to take to share the trick with me. Once we completed the template, the lesson began. I didn't quite do the 180-degree turn I was being taught. but I certainly knew how to do it. As Jack and I spoke about the journey, what Jack began to realize was that the model we had created for him to teach me was also a format he might be able to follow in class. So he decided to give it a go. What was amazing about this was that as soon as his friends saw the model, they wanted to use it too. Soon Jack was sharing his approach, his vision for learning with the class. He was guiding them. Jack had started to realize he too could be a learner. If we can recognize the child in terms of their value, voice, and vision, it offers so many possibilities. And as we start to get towards the end, I wanted just to share with you how my learning community is offering a framework to support practice and further children's learning experiences in schools and in other learning settings. The first thing that I learned from Jack was that he needed to be free to plug into his learning environment. The practices, therefore, in school, the way in which things are done, need to enable that. In terms of advancing this, the work I've done since, it means establishing some conversation starters to support adults in this shift from a taught to become to a learn to be culture. Indeed, no matter how much experience we have of working with children, no matter our qualifications, continually reflecting on whether we are creating an environment that allows the learner to plug in is vital to supporting and promoting positive learning identities. I've unpacked that a little bit in the image that you can see there. I'm not going to go through that now. We can pick up on that during the question time if people would like. Second, Jack had taught me that even though a school might create the right environment, he too needed to be able to switch on his learning capabilities. Learning is complex, and it was through making visible these different dimensions to learning that Jack could start to make sense, manage, and take control of his learning experiences. So, in conclusion, the world is changing, and the way we think about ourselves as learners must too. Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan, who we heard from at the start, said of our reliance on practices that further the disconnected learner, that in the absence of change, this form of education system will simply be preparing people for a life that no longer exists and for jobs that are no longer available. AI will take over jobs that demand cognitive ability. Where we as humans and as learners come into play is in relation to navigating the messiness that surrounds social interaction. To do that, we need to recognize our capacity to be lifelong learners and to embody learning as part of our identities, as part of who we are. This requires a shift in thinking. To be plugged in and switched on demands adults and children, learners and facilitators come together as partners. It means starting and continuing those conversations, recognizing that through investing in value, voice, and vision as a basis for who we are as learners, creates possibilities, that establishes connections that offer hope. In the words of educationist Ian Gilbert, says, when we are in a state of hopefulness, our brains literally light up with electrical energy. We're connected. However, when we find ourselves in a state of hopelessness, the brain will dim. So my response to that question, what is the one thing we could do to change the world and to equip my children and other children to make that difference, is that we need to enable positive learning identities built on value, voice, and vision that allow individuals to connect, to light up as learners, and as a result, to light up their communities, releasing a positive learning force that is equipped to navigate a changing world. I'm going to try and bring up the... I'll stop sharing, shall I? That's probably the...
Oh, we've lost you, Sam.
Can you hear me?
You are. Yeah, we see you. Thank you so much, Sam, for that wonderful fusion, bringing together that sociology of childhood lens on the learner journey and that wonderful story of Jack's model and his journey. Very powerful advocacy for disrupting the adult-child power relations. I certainly have a few questions, but I'm going to save them and open the floor to questions from anyone in our audience. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything to share with Sam? Or maybe Christina? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi,
Good
Christina.
evening. We are from Romania. I'm an associate professor at Babeș University in Cluj-Napoca. I found out about your seminar from my colleague from Liverpool, Susan K. Flowers, and I came with my students at the master course in children's rights and the management of social services. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. And I also conducted seminars about counseling in schools at the in a third year of the bachelor level in social work department at our university. So we were very interested about your presentation. Some of your ideas we discussed at our seminars, and we are very happy that to feel like in a community who is struggling to make children happier in schools. And I would like to ask you, Professor Frankel, if you see any difference in Canada between the private educational system and the public educational system, because in Romania there is a big difference in private schools and kindergartens. The approaches are closer to the connected learning compared with the public educational system.
I don't know if it's just me. We're losing you a little bit,
what
Christina.
I understand from is that the system must be adaptable.
Christine, we're losing you a little bit. I think I got a sense of your question around the comparison between schools in Canada. What I might do is just kind of broaden that out a little bit. A lot of my work has taken place in the UK. So a lot of my core research is UK based, and actually a lot of the work that we've done in Canada has been more community based and family based, which has actually been really interesting, and actually looking at the extent to which these ideas apply not just in school or at home, but also in higher education institutions. So the way in which, for example, my students have actually taken some of the ideas and have applied it within the context of their learning. So it's been really interesting seeing how ideas that were originally developed for primary age children in the UK have actually started to have this much broader impact, both in terms of different age learners, but also in terms of the different spaces where that applies. I know that totally doesn't answer your question. I know I missed certain bits of it there, but I mean, you can always email me and I'd be really happy to kind of respond.
Okay, maybe it's also a problem of connection, because I sometimes hear you with interruptions. Okay, so thank you.
That's okay. I wondered if I could ask you a question, Sam.
Go for it.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, this is familiar territory in terms of my understanding of children's participation and foregrounding children's voices in the learning experience, etc. And I suppose in a way, my question is sort of playing devil's advocate in a way. When I was writing my PhD 15 plus years ago, I was hearing these conversations, and I was taking part in them about the importance of disrupting adult-child power relationships within education and beyond. But at the time, I saw a particular battle that was difficult in the context of school, where those dynamics and hierarchies between children and adult is so marked out, and the children that I worked with at the time made a point of telling me, there's no, you're doing all this work with us, but that's no good. You need to be working with the adults. They're the ones that need to know about this. So I guess here we are, 2023, and the conversation is still there because things haven't changed all that much in some contexts, even though I know there's wonderful work going on. So I guess what I'm saying, it's not a new ideal for us to be looking at. What I guess what my question is, what is it that has to shift for schools / adults to buy into this repositioning, this disruption that you're talking about, that clearly works as a model, just to take Jack's story as one example, but as something that's going to disrupt the system that we have?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The value is in partnership. The value is in partnership, and what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to assess, evaluate, monitor, record, capture the impact that these kind of approaches have. And I think that's the area we have been really, really bad at. And that's one of the challenges, I think, within the context of the discipline, that if we want to move ourselves forward, if we want to present a position within this applied space, then we need to be better at capturing the impact that this work has. And it does have impact. I mean, the project that I referred to, the South African project, such a simple concept of giving the children a microphone and inviting them to put that in front of an adult, and the extent to which that changed the way that both groups then saw each other. Really, really powerful stuff. One of the things that I do when I first go into schools is I ask adults and children the same 3 questions. Little focus groups of adults, focus groups of children. They write their answers to these questions on the same coloured paper, and then I just bring these answers together and I display them next to each other. And for the adults, it's that moment of realization where they think they've got all these ideas about how great the child-centered work is that they're doing, and they start to realize that it's not quite as they thought it was. And that's when they realize that this notion of voice is actually something you have to actively engage with. It isn't something that you think about. It isn't something that you might mention in the context of staff training. It's actually something you have to do something with. I think so much of the process for me is about enabling and equipping the adults to bring all of this to life, to make it visible, to make it a focus of attention, and to provide some really clear ways in which you can demonstrate the impact, you can capture that, you can evaluate that, and then you can monitor it over time. I really think that's a really important part of us trying to make a difference that sticks, because I know this conversation's been going on for too long, and we really have got to try and make a difference, because it does change schools for the better.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very hopeful vision. And is that the work that Equipping Kids that you founded does with schools? Yeah.
Yes. So the whole idea of Equipping Kids is to take a lot of this theory and look at ways in which it can be applied. So it's about spending time trying stuff out, talking to children, talking to adults. You know, does this work? Does this not work? And then getting to a point where we arrive at something that is having some value, and then sharing that, you know, to more and to others to try and get them to be able to benefit from it too.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Sam? And see who's there.
Very happy to talk to people via email if people would like to do that. Be very interested to hear other people's thoughts and ideas and respond to their questions or reflections.
Yeah, and I know Craig has been or is still recording this session, and it may be that when this is shared with colleagues as a recording, there might be further conversations to be had from this.
Yeah, great.
Craig, I don't know if you wanted to come in with anything, if you're there. No, maybe he's giving dinner to his grandson. Well, I mean, if there are no more comments, I don't want to hold anyone from their evening meal or whatever it is you're going on to do. I just want to say thank you, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear all these ideas coming together. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's been great to be able to share. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.